So using settings and date, we can now grab the date that the user's passed. So now that the options are out the way, we want to go ahead and actually create or outline the function that we're going to be running every second, which I'm going to call count execution. So function count execution, and this will be our function that essentially takes the date and makes a calculation from it, and works out everything basically and places that inside of the div. So this is going to run every 1 second, and because we want it to run every 1 second, down here a bit later on we're going to be creating an interval. So what I want to do is, just before I do anything here, is go ahead and take this selector and apply it into its own variable so I can use it globally. So I'm going to say var this underscore cell, or just get rid of that there, equals this. So that's basically my this selector. Remember, later on we're going to need to change this dot days, dot hours, dot mins, dot seconds for each value. And what we're going to do inside of this function, which we're just going to go ahead and execute down here, is we're going to convert the date that we've supplied as a string into a timestamp. So I'm going to set a variable called event date, and this is going to be equal to date.parse, and in here I want to supply the string, which remember is settings date. Now I want to divide this by 1000, and the reason for this is that it will give us it in milliseconds, and we don't want it in milliseconds, we just want it in seconds. By all means, if you're creating a counter with milliseconds, then this would be fine, but in this example we're using seconds. So what I want to do is now go ahead and let's just go and alert that out. So let's just, inside of this function, alert out event date. So we'll see what's been done with our string that's been passed. You can see that it's been converted into a timestamp. Okay, so now that we have the timestamp, we can go ahead and grab the current date. So I'm going to create a new variable called current date, and this is going to be equal to jQuery, or sorry, we can use $.now. And what we want to do is that would be with brackets because it's a function, divide that by 1000 as well, because this will return it in milliseconds, and we don't want it in milliseconds, we want it in seconds, but we want to floor this value. So I'm going to go ahead and say math.floor, and that will just floor this value, so it will round it to the nearest whole integer. So let's go ahead and alert event date, and then a space, and then current date. So we'll see that these two values will differ. We've got the event date here and then the current date here. Now, to work out the amount of seconds between the two of them, we want to go ahead and create a new variable called seconds, and that's going to be obviously the event date, so the event date that we've specified, minus the current date. So this will be, sorry, not with brackets, so this will be the amount of seconds between the current time and the date that we've specified in the settings. So pretty simple. We now need to go ahead and work out the days and hours and minutes, but for each time we do this, we need to make sure that the other values will update. So for example, when seconds gets to 0 and then starts counting from 59, we want to make sure, so if days is, say, 1 day, and we hit we count down our hours, then we need days to change. And if the same with minutes, if minutes gets down to 0, we want hours to change. If seconds gets down to 0, we want minutes to change. So we need all these values to be updating. It's all well and good grabbing the seconds and making the calculations, but we need to actually make sure that each time each value updates. So let's go ahead and do days first. Let's say days is equal to, and I'm just going to pull this over, well, we'll write it out first. We essentially want to take the seconds and divide it by 60 times 60 times 24 in order to gain the amount of days we have. So that will give us, it's just really standard programming knowledge, and we're going to floor this value as well. So I'm going to say math.floor, and inside here we want to take the seconds and we want to divide it by 60 times 60 times 24. So now days represents the in fact, we'll just line all these up. Days now represents the amount of days from the seconds. Okay, so we'll go ahead and just alert out days, and you can see that. Let's just refresh. You can see we've got 1, and the date that we actually specified in here is 10th of August. Today it's the 8th of August, and I've specified this at 12 PM. So it is in fact 1 day, and then it'll be something hours. So we now know that this works properly. If I was to go ahead and change this to say the 15th of August, when we refresh you can see we've got 6 days until the 15th, because it's the 8th today, and then we'll add on a few hours for that. So we know that the days works now. However, what we want to go ahead and do is specify the hours and minutes, but we need to make a calculation of the seconds before we calculate these.